Good afternoon, Robert Scribbler. It is November 2nd, 2018. Thank you for joining me. I am going to just let you guys know that I am departing a bit from my usual coverage of climate change, extreme event news, and related scientific trends to cover an election in the United States that is probably the most critical election of our lifetimes, and that likely every election going forward from this point on will be the most critical election of our lifetimes. We are at a place in history that requires moral action, that requires just action, that requires political courage and moral courage and conviction, one that will require those of us who are moral people, just people, to speak out and act in defense of all of the things that we hold dear. So I know that what I am doing will probably not be popular among some of my listeners and viewers, and I know that what I am doing will probably be branded as political, but unfortunately I was not the one that politicized the issue of climate change. Those who politicized the issue of climate change were the people that attacked the scientists, that attacked facts and reason, that drummed up climate change denial and used that as a political issue, and that are right now drumming up fear and hate in an amoral, in my opinion, vile attempt to divide the people of the United States one against the other. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about an issue that is presently ongoing, that is related to human-caused climate change, and that is also related to the challenge we face when it comes to human-caused climate change, or the multiple challenges we face. Primarily, one of the biggest challenges we face will be dealing with our own demons. Franklin Roosevelt famously said that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Well, there is a lot of truth to that, and at present there is a lot of unjustifiable fear and hate being drummed up over this issue of migrants coming to the U.S. and asking help. The migrants themselves are being demonized. They're being called terrorists. They're being called gang members. They're being called criminals. They're being called rapists. And these unfactual, untrue statements are what they are trying to do is aim at the heart of American values, namely that America has for decades and decades and decades now served as a beacon of hope to all of the destitute around the world, a place where people can come for safe haven, a place where people can come and contribute their lives and their work and their knowledge, a place where people can aspire for a better life. And if there is such a thing as American exceptionalism, it lies at the center of this ideal of what is a kind of global equality, and of lifting people up and providing for them a way out of situations in which their lives are threatened, in situations where their livelihoods are threatened, in situations of desperation, where children are at threat of being ripped from their mothers, and at threat to their lives themselves, at threat of being exploited in the various human trafficking rings around the world today. So I'd just like to point out that human-caused climate change creates more desperation. It creates more loss of home and livelihood, and it creates more opportunities for the amoral villains who live in human society to exploit desperation. And presently, President Trump, right now in the United States, as President of the United States, is exploiting desperation by demonizing the very immigrants that are seeking the help of the good people of the United States. So I'm going to talk about that more. I'm going to talk more about how this exploitation is anti-factual, and I'm going to talk about how this exploitation is harming the defensive readiness of the United States by essentially misappropriating U.S. troops to the border where they are not needed. Even as President Trump says that rock throwing is the equivalent of a mass of people seeking to invade the United States with automatic weapons, which is totally not the case. The people in this caravan right now are poor people. They are desperate people. They are people seeking our help. They are people seeking our charity. They are people seeking our goodwill. And it's a goodwill that not only do the ideals of the United States compel us to give, but many of our religions, the Christian religion, the Muslim religion, the Buddhist religion, the United Unitarian religions, the Jewish religion, and all good religions in this country compel us to provide such charity if we have the means, and we do have the means as this country to give help and give aid and give succor to poor, destitute people from around the world. Okay, so I feel rather emotional about this because it is extraordinarily wrong what the government of the United States under President Trump is doing now. President Trump has perverted the government of the United States and twisted it away from the traditional ideals and methods of operation for the United States. But before I get into that, I would just like to talk about how climate change is going to displace people and how the appropriate response to that is to give them help and not to feed into the fear-mongering and demagoguery of people who seek to exploit fear of others to maintain and gain political power. So I'm going to read this quote from the Brookings Institute on displacement caused by the effects of human-caused climate change. Rather, climate change produces environmental effects which may make it difficult or even impossible for people to survive where they are. Most causes of displacement triggered by climate change, such as flooding, hurricanes, desertification, or even the flooding of stretches of land, are not new. However, the frequency and magnitude of such events is likely, and I will say, will increase. And so human-caused climate change produces desperation by removing habitats in which humans can survive. And as a result, these people will come and seek help. And we as charitable individuals are compelled by morality to provide that. Okay, so now with regards to the present migrant caravan, the situation for the migrants is one of desperation. Many of these families are under threat from lawlessness in their own countries, under threat of armed gangs like those that operate in Honduras. And I'm just going to go ahead and read this quote from the Washington Post. I'm going to go ahead and provide the links to the various articles that I'm citing so that you can read them. They're good articles. And from Ingrid and two of her youngest children who are a part of the migrant caravan that is now approaching the United States. She had traveled in a caravan from Honduras for 2 months with her husband and 3 kids on buses, trains, and trucks, or walking more than 2,700 miles, heading north to flee gangs that had killed her brother and were threatening her children. She had asked police in her Honduran hometown for protection, but she didn't know the names of those who threatened to kill her and who confronted her teenage son at school, demanding money they believed her brother had left her. So these people in this caravan, most of them are fleeing these situations of lawlessness and violence that are multiplied by extreme weather events that reduce access to water, that reduce access to food, and reduce access to shelter, that create the situation of desperation that people like those in these armed gangs are exploiting. Meanwhile, we have similarly exploitative people in power in the United States scapegoating these desperate individuals, these victims of violence in their own country, basically painting them as evil. And for example, Donald Trump has called immigrants animals. Fox News has talked endlessly about how the caravan itself is composed of people who are carrying diseases in an effort to drum up hate and fear aimed at these migrants. This is not something that is a part of our values. This goes against everything it means to be an American patriot, to demonize people in such a way. President Trump and Fox News, his Fox News enablers, and those in right-wing media who are enabling him, and those Republicans, many Republicans, unfortunately, who are also enabling him, are all together engaged in spreading a kind of anti-factual hate. A hate that is aimed directly at the Republican base, which unfortunately responds very readily to messages of hate and fear in an effort, in a vile effort to retain power, in an amoral effort to maintain power, under a situation in which the president himself is rationally suspected of numerous instances of wrongdoing. And unfortunately, the rhetoric that Trump and many along the right-wing section of the Republican Party, which is considered to be the Republican base, is inflaming fear of migrants, and this fear of migrants recently spurred an unhinged individual to massacre Jews in a synagogue in Pittsburgh because he somehow linked this caravan to an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, a conspiracy theory that was repeated on the right and hinted at in Trump's own campaign speeches. So not only is this rhetoric demonizing migrants, not only is it threatening violence against migrants, but is inflaming and empowering the worst people among us to actually commit violence. And the word for this is incitement. It's incitement of violence through eliminationist rhetoric, through pandering to fear and hate, and through perpetrating conspiracy theories that have long been used to demonize often victimized classes. But in addition to all of the hate speech, and in addition to the inflaming incitement of violent acts by Trump and others on the right, Trump is now also misappropriating the U.S. military. Now, because Trump is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, he can tell the U.S. military where to go, where to deploy. And the officers of the U.S. military are compelled by oath to obey those commands. However, when Trump moves thousands of troops to the U.S. border, and when the number of troops moving to the U.S. border greatly outnumbers any number of poor, desperate people that are approaching the U.S. border seeking our aid, then Trump is using the military in a way that is not responding to an actual physical threat. And what that does is it takes U.S. military strength, it puts it in a non-strategic position, and it weakens the United States' defense against actual threats around the world, threats coming from countries such as potentially Russia and China, who have traditionally been our near-peer military rivals. And that reduces our readiness posture, that reduces our ability to defend the United States in such an event that the United States was actually attacked by a military force. Now, in the context of that statement, I would also like to call your attention to a recent article from Newsweek that has managed to gain access to what is known as the intelligence preparation of the battlefield report for troops on the U.S. southern border that are being deployed to respond to this this engineered political crisis that Trump is using to inflame his base, to try and get his base to turn out to vote in the 2018 election, and doing it in such a way that is severely dividing the American people. Now, this intelligence report is a report that happens whenever U.S. military forces deploy. I mean, it's called the intelligence preparation of the battlefield, but what's happening on the U.S. border is not a battlefield. It is a collection of migrants who are merely seeking our help. It is not an invasion force as the president has characterized it, and as Fox News has characterized it, and as many of those on the right have characterized it. It is simply people seeking help from us. So these troops are going to the border, and according to Newsweek, the intelligence preparation of the battlefield notes that the most likely course of action for the migrant caravan is that the number of people in the caravan will dwindle as the caravan approaches the U.S. And this caravan is kind of an annual occurrence. It's happened before. It's not as if this has never occurred. And that by the time they reach the U.S. border many weeks from now, well after the election, as troops sit on the U.S. border and do essentially nothing, it is likely that the number of migrants that actually come to the U.S. border to seek our aid and to seek asylum will be greatly reduced from the number that are presently traveling right now, about 2,700. Now, the number of troops that Trump wants to deploy to the U.S. border are in the range of 5,000 to 15,000. And from the standpoint of a threat analyst, usually you want to use the military in a way that is appropriate to the threat. Deploying 15,000 of the best trained troops in the world, having access to the highest tech weapons in the world, facing off against a dwindling caravan of approximately 2,700 desperate migrants seeking our help, who if they are armed at all, may be armed with rocks, is not an appropriate response. In fact, the U.S. Border Patrol forces presently at the U.S. border are more than sufficient to deal with the issue. So the reason why Trump is talking about this issue, to reiterate, is one, to drum up hate and fear of migrants as a political issue in order to try and spur people on the right who unfortunately respond to messages of hate and fear to vote. This is the very picture of an unhinged president, of a president that has lost his way both morally and mentally, and a president that is hurting the actual security of the United States by using the Army of the United States as a political tool of hate aimed at desperate people who need our help. Thank you for joining me, and I'll be chatting with you soon.